I'm your host, Tess Brigham. So let's start making sense of the mess together. Today, I'm talking with Jessica Holst, a people and culture leader who's helped scale iconic companies like SpaceX, CAA, Mattel, and most recently, Verve Talent and Literary Agency. She's built HR teams from scratch, led through massive growth, and knows how to create workplaces where people actually want to show up. Jessica's all about disrupting the status quo and building cultures that bring out the best in people. And I cannot wait to dive into her journey. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So tell me, how did you end up in HR? Was it a plan or did you stumble into it?
It was absolutely not a plan. I didn't know the job existed.
Mm,
Um, I started out at an immigration law firm out of college, and I had had a conversation with my advisor as I was finishing school. And I said, "Would you write me a recommendation for law school?" And she said, "Absolutely, after you spend a year working at one, because I think you're going to
mm,
love law school and absolutely hate the practice of law." And so I
wow.
was like, "Well, I'll show you." And so I went and worked at a law firm, and she was correct. And so thank you. You saved me a lot of money at the end of the day.
Yes.
And while I was there during that time, it was the first dot-com boom. Hiring was crazy. And I knew a lot about employing on visas in the US. And so I was recruited by a corporate client, and I had no idea what HR was. And really, they wanted me to focus on recruiting and with this particular body of knowledge. And that's where it started. And I grew into it,
Hmm.
and I figured out what it needed to be for me to value it.
Hmm.
But it was a kind of windy road at first.
Yeah.
And definitely from that immigration angle.
Yeah,
Um,
but I love that advice you got, which is exactly what I share with my clients all the time, which is we get very caught up in title and salary and prestige and what it all means. And yeah, if you like school, you like school, whether you're going to study law, whether you're going to study business, but
yep.
doing it is a totally different ball of wax. So I'm curious, how long were you there until you realized like, oh no, I don't want to do this?
It was just under a year. And I
Okay.
went with the excellent, wonderful support of, it was a very small immigration law firm, huge fan.
Hmm.
And they were supportive because this was a client that was going to bring on a lot more people, and it was going to continue business for them. And, it was my first year out of college. They weren't
Hmm.
expecting me to be there more than a year and a half anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was just fine.
So HR, HR definitely gets a bad rap, right? Because they're sort of seen as these rule enforcers.
Yep.
So, how do you think about your role just beyond policies and paperwork and
Yeah.
all of that?
I mean, there's so much data out there that talks about the impact that how people feel at work
Hmm.
um, has on the big stuff like revenue generation. And it's really critically important, but HR is seen as a nice to have, in part because the function has changed dramatically over the
Hmm.
last 35 years, 40 years. It was the old school personnel, hire and fire. That person had no special information that
Hmm.
anybody didn't have. They weren't focused on the employee's experience unless they were coming in the door or out the door. And
Hmm.
since then, we've learned a lot about the psychology of the workplace. And it's been really difficult, however, to get organizations to adopt that. And there still
Hmm.
very much are different kinds of HR practitioners. There are definitely people who are less strategic and more, they keep candy on their desk and order birthday cakes. And there are
Hmm.
organizations that wouldn't know how to use someone who was more strategic. And then there are people who approach it as, this is our single most important asset. How do we make sure that it is running as well as it could possibly at any given moment, as stably as possible?
Hmm.
And what are the decisions that we can make that sets this group of people who are our biggest asset up for success. And I think one of the challenging things is that when you look at HR that way and strategically, it can be viewed as cold.
Mm.
But when you view it as talking about how people feel, it's viewed as dismissed as squishy.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is, how people feel impacts their performance, period. We know this.
Mm-hmm.
And we know this because every time a football team is down at the half, they go in and have a rousing speech from their coach.
Mm-hmm.
They're not getting pay increases in that room at that time. They're not getting acknowledged to their peers at that time. They're not getting tacos for
Mm-hmm.
Tuesdays. They are solely being understood by somebody they want to follow, that they
Mm-hmm.
feel inspired by and loyal to, in a group of people they want to show up for. And that is the difference between a team that was getting crushed and goes back and kills it, which happens all the
Mm-hmm.
time, and teams that don't. And for some reason, we haven't really been able, I've worked for so many sports fans in my career, but they've never really drawn the connection between it's harnessing that emotion,
Mm-hmm.
uh, that sense of responsibility to others, the sense of community that has a real outcome.
Mm-hmm.
We see it on the football field, but we can't always invest in it in our workplaces. And that's crazy
Yeah.
because it is a game changer for businesses.
Yeah. I was reading on, of course, I was just scrolling through social media, but I was reading this post about, and now I can't remember if it was the Ritz-Carlton or another super, super fancy hotel, but it was about how they had this consultant come in and he said, we're all about luxury. We're all about, kind of like Nordstrom's, right? We're just,
Yep.
we want to be that place that people talk about. And they apparently, it's like each guest spends, if you're a loyal guest, you spend something like $200,000 a year. I mean, sorry, in a lifetime staying
Okay.
at these Ritz-Carltons, very fancy hotels. So they said, okay, well, everybody can, on their own discretion, spend up to $2,000 per incident or whatever it is per person. And so it's one of these things where they're not making them like get a I want to get you that form and you got to fill it out and wait for it to
Yep.
go through 15 people. It's a little bit like saying, I think what was so genius about it is it did a couple different things. It gave the power to the person and it made the person feel like, oh, I can be responsible. I can figure this out. They're trusting me with this amount of money. And each
Yep.
time it was always, I'm sure it was spent in ways that people didn't love or not. They kind of maybe went, huh. But the stories that they told about people flying and, someone leaving a laptop and someone flying to the next, city to give it to them,
Yeah.
stories of, them just showing and doing things at the right moment at the right time. It led to the employees being far more creative with it. And then you create these very, very loyal customers because I
Yeah.
think that we underestimate how little it takes to get someone to really like invest
Yep.
in you. And we've all been there. And the way they phrased it, which I thought was so smart, was it was almost this thing of it was this idea of you could very easily correct the problem right then and there. I am freaking out. I don't know where my slides are and it's in my,
Yep.
it's far away. And it's almost like we will get them to you. I'll see you then. Like solving the problem doesn't need to be a huge problem. I mean,
Yep.
that was a big problem, but doesn't need to be this huge giant problem. It's almost like I think that it's almost like we're giving people a sense of calm.
Mhm.
I think a lot of times, like that feeling of I'm being taken care of.
Yes. And I'm trying to remember which rental agency it was. Might have been Enterprise. But
Mm-hmm.
one of the things they started doing was empowering their frontline managers at locations to make financial decisions in terms of giving refunds or
Mm-hmm.
giving upgrades. And it showed over time the huge impact it had on their clientele and repeat customers because I knew that the person I was facing could solve my problem.
Mm-hmm.
And that person who is dealing with these same problems all the time is the best person to solve it. And
Yes.
that example with the hotel is it pulls in two parts. One, let's get the solution as close as we can to our customer,
Mm-hmm.
and let's treat our employees like they are a big important part of why our folks trust us and people come
Mm-hmm.
back to us and we trust them to solve problems well. But also the people on the ground, they know what's wrong. And what kills me when companies spend a gajillion dollars to bring in an outside consulting firm, to figure out how their manufacturing floor could be more efficient,
Mm-hmm.
and they're going to spend an immense amount of money on that, and they're not even going to get 80% of what their own staff could have told them if they'd
Mm-hmm.
asked their own staff.
Yeah.
And the number of problems that can be solved internally, if you create an environment that does that, is amazing. And one of the things I love about this statistic, an engaged workforce is 17% more productive, but 23% more profitable.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference between those two numbers is people aren't just working more or faster or better. They're also solving problems for the organization that save or make it money. Because if you're only 17% more productive, where is that 6% coming from? And it's from
Mm-hmm.
creating an environment where your employees are like, I think we're paying too much for napkins.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see what this company is doing. And they also make sure that they don't overspend on expense reports, because they don't feel like they feel a sense of responsibility and
Mm-hmm.
a sense of care. And they do come to the table with ideas that make things work better, faster, and cheaper. Those innovations aren't going to come from people who do not feel heard. They've already been silenced. They
Mm-hmm.
are not going to bring you new information. You have not treated them like a resource. And it's really very simple, but it's hugely impactful, because we are so moved by our feelings in any given time. And I think
Mm-hmm.
it's easy to dismiss that as squishy and soft in the workplace, and we need to focus. But it's how a human being works. It's how
Mm-hmm.
human motivation works.
Yeah.
And so you can't decide it's too squishy unless you only employ robots.
Which I know that's right. This is what I love is how often I see people trying to replace people with robots. And I think there are certain ways in which, yeah, I think you can replace certain jobs, certain things people are doing. But, it's so interesting because people have asked me about AI and AI therapy. Like, are you nervous? And I'm like, not really, no, because, you know, what you're paying for is someone who the subtlety and being able to like read someone's face and understand and have been through this. And the thing is that each person is so unique. We're unique in terms of our stories and who we are, but also what motivates us, what excites us, what's going to drive us. And the reality is that you need another person to have that, you need that other person to witness that in a way, right? And I think
Yeah.
that is one piece that people forget, which is, yeah, maybe, okay, maybe chat GPT and I can go, moment to moment with each other and to see who gives, the best advice or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, we need people to turn to us and say, good job, right? The chat
Yeah.
GPT telling me I did a good job isn't going to hold the same thing as your boss, your leader, your parent, someone you respect, someone that you love. So, why is this so hard for us? Because yes, there's a million and one books. We read about this constantly. We've seen all the stats. It is very, very clear that if you treat your employees well, they will be loyal to you. And one of the big things is that a lot of young adults are entering the workforce really kind of saying, hey, I'm not going to work super hard, because the same things that used to be out there, the homes and the pensions and the being able to retire, all of these things that made work sustainable, are gone. So,
Yep.
and people can't even afford, right? You can't even, your entry level job can barely afford rent. So now young people are sort of saying, well, yeah, I'm not going to jump in if I can't even afford to pay my rent. And so
Right.
we see this huge gap in between what CEOs are making and what, the average employee is making. And what just boggles my mind is, why can't they see that, if you just let go of everything that you're earning over here, that maybe this could help you.
Yep.
And I know that you have board of directors and you have other people that CEOs have to answer to. But at the
Yep.
same time, I'm like, why can't, it's very clear. Why can't we get it?
I mean, I think probably greed. I mean, there comes a point when one person can only buy so many washing machines. You can only
Yes.
be so motivated by a massive comp package that you can't even really, I if you paid me 4 million and then you said, okay, but we'll give you 4.5 million next year if you do better, that those are just large ridiculous numbers. 200
Mm-hmm.
million, 300 million. I don't think a CEO who makes 300 million is working harder than a CEO who makes 200 million
Yeah.
or is necessarily more impactful. Money is not short term, and it's particularly short term compensation decisions. That's not the way. And
Mm-hmm.
we're making decisions without thinking things through, and our society is getting faster and faster and faster. And so I think a lot of what's happening with AI right now is so reactive, and I'm really paying attention to who's being reactive and saying we're going to save a ton of money with this, we're going to be
Mm-hmm.
able to let go a number of employees, and who's spending the time saying, okay, great, what can we automate for our employees in roles where humanity is a competitive advantage?
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of places humanity is a competitive advantage. And I was speaking earlier to a colleague, and we were talking about all of these HR technology systems and which one is better. And the reality is, they're all leaning so hard into AI that the service is terrible in all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And they aren't saying, how can we do this better with this new, what resources can we put in a human's hand faster so they
Mm-hmm.
can use that frontline human person to solve a problem or to make someone feel better. And I'm interested to see who takes the time to test different applications and even just has the other half of the conversation. I mean, I'm sure there are rooms full of finance people saying, where can we save money with AI? But
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that there is a conversation about, in what roles is humanity a competitive advantage.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're not looking at both, you're not solving the right problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
So it's almost like people are taking this attitude of, oh, we can replace this customer service person with
yep.
a robot. Great, no problem. Versus, well, then AI could do all of the stuff behind this, like the stuff that,
Yeah.
I don't know, making certain processes easier and
Mhm.
streamlined so that the person who is the actual customer service rep,
Yes.
has less to do. You can see that that would be incredibly helpful. But instead, we tend to go to this place of, oh, that's it. Let's just replace them.
Right.
And and we see this a lot out here in tech because because constantly you see this with tech. They hire, fire, hire. I
Yep.
mean, up and down and up and down and up and down. And it's just like, what? How do you not know by now how many people you're going to need? Do you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
just, but it is that feeling of when there's, when the economy's good and the money's flowing in, all of these companies, they go right on, oh, things are great. And they go right along. And then the panic sets in and then
Yep.
they reduce. Though I often wonder with some of these companies if they use these times to fire a bunch of people, that they just kind of
Mhm.
like, almost like, yeah, no one will be mad at us if we fire them right now because everyone else is doing these mass layoffs. Let's fire them all and see what happens. Like
Yep.
I think sometimes that's what they're thinking. Like, let's just
I
get rid of
definitely
them
think
and
there
see what
is
happens.
there
Yeah.
Yeah, there are two things that play into that. And one is there's a lack of lateral thinking about how can we save money on employee costs in a short period of time so that we win in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also, we are so bad at giving feedback that we let people fail for extended
Mm-hmm.
periods of time. And so a lot of these companies, yes, will avoid the hard decision by saying, we're having a riff. Let's just look at who's not been performing,
Mm-hmm.
and haven't necessarily done a great job making sure that that person was in the right role to perform. And in the meantime, if you've had somebody failing in their job for a year and a half or 2 years, all
Mm-hmm.
of their colleagues are pissed off because they're
Mm-hmm.
watching somebody do absolutely nothing and get to take home their paycheck every week too.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, I think we are getting worse and worse at communicating with one another because we're
Mm-hmm.
spending less time doing it in a human way. And it's causing so many ripple effects, but it's definitely true at work.
Mm-hmm.
We're replacing recruiting teams with AI. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, any kind of sales process or customer service role, number one, the biggest impact on someone's experience is how a human being responds to them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, what can we automate for that customer service person so that they can solve problems faster, more easily, with happier customers, so that we can scale up on customers. And there are so many conversations about how do we cut back on employee costs, not how do we scale,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that we can now do a lot more with the same number of people.
Mm-hmm.
And we're very much in a cutting mentality. And part of that is driven by short-term rewards,
Mm-hmm.
shareholder response, right? But
Yes.
it's the communication piece, and you and I have talked before about communication in the workplace. And I think as I'm watching it happen, and I'm Gen X, and I'm observing now popular
Mm-hmm.
life. Um, Everything, language changes so quickly. Ways of phrasing things change so quickly. You know, there were phrases that stuck around in the 80s for a couple of years. You're
Mm-hmm.
lucky if something is like 6 weeks in our current like discourse among people who are super online or super informed or super in popular culture at any given
Mm-hmm.
moment, which means every senior person in that organization is getting farther and farther away from the people that they're trying to impact positively faster and faster.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I've put that well,
Yeah,
but
no, yeah.
we make a lot of fun of the olds not knowing how to say things anymore, and
Mm-hmm.
it's true. It's ridiculously true. But that means if you don't feel like you have the words to talk to someone you're sitting with, how are you going to be honest with them about something difficult?
Yeah. Yeah.
And how do I even know what the right words are for you? And I think we need to be really addressing that in the workplace, and not
Mm-hmm.
with AI. We need to be doing it
Mm-hmm.
with humans. And so I think the question we can ask is, what can we save time on with AI so that our staff can do things that are going to make us better?
Yeah.
Um,
Because or
what can we save over here to invest over here?
yeah, it's almost like companies would it would benefit them if they could say, how do we invest in AI but not change, like not get rid of anybody? Like
Yeah.
let's keep everybody that we have. How do we use AI? And again, that's the short term versus the long term
Yep.
strategies, right? Because short term, they're gone, the salary's gone, boom, done. Look, doesn't that look good? But long term would mean that, yeah, you'd have to give it some time and let people ease into these new roles and figure out how to balance these things. But it could be
Yep.
huge in the end. So, well, you and I want to talk a little bit about the generations because both you and
Okay.
I, well, first I want to talk about the Hollywood. It's because both you and I worked in Hollywood. For me, it was a quadrillion years ago in the late 90s. And so of course, I didn't work at CAA, but I know the agency world. I worked at a smaller agency, and I knew a lot of those CAA, the agents in the mailroom and the assistants and all of that. When I was there, Hollywood was very much a hierarchy. And it was very old school in the sense of you did not push back. You did not tell your boss you had this great idea. You did not, no, no, no. You keep your mouth shut and you do your job. And there's a certain amount of like hazing you'll see in terms of how you treat your assistant, with this idea of eventually you will have an assistant of your own. So,
Mhm.
right? So you get to treat them like crap, which I always thought was such a really insane thing. Um, but I'm curious of what your experience is like, and what is it like? I know you're not in that world directly anymore, but even, 20 years later, I can imagine is that what it still is?
I mean, I think one of the real struggles for Hollywood in understanding why they keep failing at diversity is understanding the systemic changes they need to make. And I
Mm-hmm.
was really, really happy to be at Verve when we increased assistant pay, and we
Mm-hmm.
were able to increase assistant pay from, it was like 25 to almost 40%. I don't have numbers in front of me, but
And that's huge. That's
it was
huge.
huge. And then everybody else in town had to do it too. And I think, the agencies could talk about the fact that they want diversity, but they
Mm-hmm.
were only paying for a very specific profile. And that's for the kinds of families who have the parental payroll, which it wasn't even a term
Yes.
I'd heard before I moved here.
But yes, I want to
So
talk about that. Yeah.
if you're going to choose to pay people well below a living wage, you're not going to have a lot of people to choose from.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a huge problem. And I think they're getting a little better there.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the real issues that I came away with is that so much of how Hollywood works is more like, I don't mean they're the mafia. That's not what I'm saying. But it's a system that's based on favors and relationships.
Yes.
So, and they're generational.
Yes. Yes.
So
Yes.
you can afford to take this job at this agency that doesn't pay well because your typically dad made a ton of money at that agency and also banked favors all around town.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about an economy based on favors and personal relationships being more important than output
Mm-hmm.
is it's not merit based. You cannot make banking favors merit based.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as a kind of setup, people trying to do this work in this industry are pushing a boulder up a hill so steep it's ridiculous, and people are working so hard to make changes. But it would be like saying, I feel like this particular mafia family has too many Italians. Let's mix it up. And
Mm-hmm.
you know what? We also should probably have more people who've worked in this industry and this industry. And it's
Mm-hmm.
ridiculous because they aren't going to be able to operate as quickly or easily in that environment. So
Mm-hmm.
if you actually do believe, which I believe diversity is an imperative in Hollywood, I believe
Mm-hmm.
agencies who don't figure it out will become obsolete. Um, but the system is one that is not merit based,
Yeah.
and
No.
that's going to kill them.
Yeah. No, this is something, and I've talked about this before. I can't remember if it's been on this podcast or somewhere else, but yeah, when I was in Hollywood at that time in the late 90s, you could live, you could
Yeah,
work and live, but it wasn't a big life by any
yeah,
means. Nowhere near what you see, what your clients are making. And I remember though, my parents gave me money every month, like for a period of time. And I only lasted 3 years. And by the time I left, I was like broke. I had nothing. Like I
yeah,
had no savings. I had nothing to show for all of the hard work that I had, because I could never save. It was virtually impossible to save. And that was the
yeah.
thing. And when I looked around, what I saw were people that were right, young, white families that are at least upper middle class, to be able to give your kid extra money every month after you just paid for their college education and everything. That's the other thing too, is you could not have student loans. You could not have student loans and do this job, because there's no way you could pay the student loans and do this too. So that's the other one. But that's very much, even back then, there were a lot of very wealthy people. So these assistants driving, $60,000 cars, because their parents bought them the car. But it was the same thing. I mean, my family, they weren't quadrillionaires, but that's how I was able to make it work. That's how I was able to get my first internship where I made no money, was because my parents could afford to let me do that. And I think at the core, what bugs me about it, because I have a client right now and she would love to go to LA and do social media stuff. She can't. Her family has no money. There's just no way she could do. She works at this job and she can't leave the job. I mean, it's all just. And what I really think about is, it's almost this feeling of, oh, certain people get dreams and other people don't get dreams. And that's one of the things. And this is the same with this industry, and like publishing is another one where you're paying what, $50,000-$60,000 in New York. And it's the same thing. So you're wondering why. Well, why are all the books like this? Why are all the movies like this? And it's like, yeah, because you're hiring, the only people that can work there are Nepo kids, or other. And this is the same thing in the MFT, the degree that I have, it's a little bit of the same there too, where it's so hard to get all the hours. It's such an endurance, especially here in California, that it does. You have to have some other support. You can't, you have to. And so then when people have all this extra support, what are you getting?
And that was something I was really, really proud. I did not expect to be able to impact assistant pay as quickly as we were able to. One of the things that I stayed in entertainment for was to improve assistant pay and to get some semblance of sense of responsibility in agents for the development of their assistant, and broader development for agents as professionals and managers and people leaders. And so it was kind of going to be a long shot, but I was going to take it. And an opportunity came up really quickly, based on a situation a really valued employee was in. And I'm proud to say that my board listened, and they listened quickly. And they said, well, then, okay, get us more data. They wanted to know. And I think most organizations are happy just to say, I suffered when I was that age. They'll be fine. They're not asking for data. So I was asked for data. We pulled data from our assistants. And when ultimately I brought the results and they saw that most people would have to be coming in, it was like negative $127 a month. One of the board members just said, well, fuck it. We're fixing it. Like, I don't know how we're paying for it, but we have to fix this. And I was really grateful to have been there in that moment in time. But without the willingness to say, is this really the same as it was when I was young? And by the way, if we're trying to have a different industry, should it still be the same as when I was young? You're going to be in the same situation.
Yeah. Well, and what's so interesting about Hollywood is, you're absolutely right. It is a town full of your relationships, and obviously when you have family members, that's how I got my first job, a family member that was in the industry. When you have family members, that's the relationship, and that's how you get in. And it is a weird place. And I think what's changed it so much and why they haven't been able to survive this is the fact that before it was all about gatekeepers. So people had to suck up to the gatekeepers, and now people don't have to suck up to the gatekeepers anymore. Like those people have to be really on it. They really have to know their stuff. And that's the other part of it too, is gatekeepers can't just hold the gate. It's like, no, there's all these other people that are going to come along and make the things themselves and do it. And we were seeing that a little bit in the 90s, with Good Will Hunting and all that kind of stuff. But even Good Will Hunting is an example of like, they both had established careers, and you know what I mean? It's like, even that's not this story that people think it is, this sort of Hollywood story. Okay. So I want to hear about what's happening today. at your current, the work that you're currently doing with young people, with Gen Z, with millennials. What are the trends that you're seeing with young people both entering the workforce and working, and what are we seeing millennials who I always say they've been through a lot and
Right?
and they are tired. And I
Yes.
wonder and worry about them too.
I think that's absolutely true. And I think, we've been talking about millennials since millennials were just finishing college.
Yeah.
And we're talking about very established, grown, seasoned executive people now.
Hmm.
And the impact on them at this point, now they're leading younger people. They're leading people who are coming into the industry. And have we properly prepared that generation for people leadership?
Hmm.
And there are a number of things that have worked against it. I mean, the last few years have been a little rough,
Hmm.
but I think some of our values have changed. For many people, it was as a result of the pandemic and whatever
Hmm.
view they had of it. I remember after 9/11, some of my high school classmates who had gone and worked on Wall Street quit and became elementary school teachers
Hmm.
because they were like, yeah, this is not how I want to go.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people came out of the pandemic with, how do I really want to live my life?
Hmm.
And what is that? What does that mean for my family? What does that mean for my job? And there are boundaries that people have, and rightly so, that my generation doesn't know what to do with, because
Hmm.
we were basically told, like, you're doing great if you were the biggest doormat for your corporation ever. Like,
Yes.
never sleep, never, that's how you know you're good, is by being
Hmm.
completely miserable and owned by your job. Uh,
Hmm.
so I think we need to think about success differently. We've also spent most of our time avoiding really meaningful feedback in the workplace around performance reviews. So
Hmm.
clock watching then becomes, well, I mean, God, he's here every night until 8 p.m. You know,
Hmm.
and that's not what people want to do. And frankly, they shouldn't have to for the company to be successful, at least on a long-term basis.
Yeah.
And so there are a couple things in terms of a total lack of understanding of one another's motivation for being in that room in that moment, being in that job, and what job you want to do next, and assuming that you want a promotion every 2 years and that that's
Hmm.
what you're working toward, because that was also the value that Gen X was given, and
Hmm.
now that's who a lot of the decision makers are. Um, but I also think, we lost a lot during the pandemic in terms of understanding one another and the workplace.
Hmm.
There were people who were getting hired out of college who had never been to an office before,
Yep.
because they had done their internships that ended up being, workshops on Zoom.
Hmm.
But then the expectation of how they would show up was not changed.
Hmm.
And so I think that was immediately jarring. Um,
Hmm.
and some places have done better at thinking about it than others. But I really think, and it didn't just impact people who were just coming out of college. It was anybody in a really formative period of their career who all of a sudden didn't have signposts around them to
Hmm.
follow. There was no learning through osmosis. And we haven't replaced that well enough in most remote workplaces, that we aren't going to get. It just takes longer to get up to speed on how you operate in this environment
Hmm.
if you're not in it.
Hmm.
Um, and I think how you show up and what your values are massive. How you show up, you may think you're giving one message, but if a different generation speaks a different language, they are hearing a different message.
Hmm.
And I think it all comes back to communication and motivation, and how do you feel at work.
Hmm.
And we also need to find the right place with, how do you bring your authentic self to work, but not necessarily your whole self.
Hmm.
Some parts of you should stay home.
Oh, yeah.
They are not your work parts. And I think we're also still figuring out how to do that without putting it in a way that's like, well, I don't care about who you are as a person or what you have going on.
Mhm.
And when values have changed to the point that getting promoted every 2 years is no longer important, why are you telling people to change their behavior if they don't want that thing that you're used to using as the carrot?
Mhm. Yeah.
So shockingly, I have not yet solved this problem, but I'm working on it.
Yes. And that part, I think what you're really speaking about is it's very hard what you're talking about, this difference between being authentic and then your whole self,
Mm-hmm.
because that's one of the things, I'm sure you've seen the stats on when people are able to be authentic at work and you're able to own who you are as a person and your how you want to live and your preference, like all of that. If when you have that, it does make a huge difference. But I also do understand because I do get people, I, again, a lot of lawyers, I do get people that they turn to me and go, what do I do when my, direct report wants to, like, they feel like they should be therapists
Yeah.
and they feel, and I do, and I understand that part of it. And they're sort of what I'm hearing from them is, should I, should I encourage this? Should I not encourage it? Which I really get. I understand the fresh. I don't know if I would know the answer right in that moment. And I think some of it is kind of depends on the person. It kind of
Yeah.
depends on that person's boundaries. And if you're noticing that they have no boundaries, that's a problem. But it may be, and I think this is the majority of them, where people are just like, they just need some acknowledgement and they can move right along. Like, oh, that sounds
Yeah.
really hard. That
Yes.
sounds like that's been tough. Okay, how can we support you? And then someone say, oh no, I'm good. Thank you for listening. Like that's usually, but I do know that there are people that they are doing very I don't want to say inappropriate, but just bringing their whole selves, way too much of themselves
Yes,
to
I
work.
actually had a conversation about that today with someone who has a direct report who is bringing a lot of their personal concerns and kind of laying it out there, and not in the
Mm-hmm.
way that you would have said, if I don't show up well in this meeting today, I apologize. I was up with my sick kid all night. It
Mm-hmm.
was more like entire life choices and insight and seeking connection and understanding through that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's not what we're here for.
Mm-hmm.
And the nice thing is, sometimes your home life's a bit of a shit show. And having it separate from work means you have a place where you can shine and feel good about what's going on with you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I also think that's getting muddied. But I think it's hard to understand if you weren't there in the 80s that a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people had to refer to their spouse by the wrong gender or by no gender.
Yeah.
You don't understand the kinds of things people were having to lie about. And it wasn't, you know, how they spent their weekend.
Mm-hmm.
It was who is the most important person in their life. And I think we've just flexed too far
Mm-hmm.
in terms of saying what part of us still belongs at the office. And, there are Tuesday daytime close and Saturday night close. And
Mm-hmm.
this conversation I'm asking my boss to have with me, does it still fall in Tuesday category?
Mm-hmm.
And those conversations are important, and you want people to be able to flag when there's something critical going on in their life. And
Mm-hmm.
very early on in my divorce, I confided in one of my bosses and said, I need you to do me the benefit of giving me feedback if I start showing up in meetings more reactive or more anxiously or more tired.
Mm-hmm.
I have this thing going on, and I need to make sure that I can keep it as part of my home self and not my work self.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a time where you never could have said that.
Yes.
Um, and I think being able to throw those flags up is really good. And my bosses exactly got where I was coming from in that, and they were then positioned to not think, God, I don't know, is she on it? What's going on? Is she looking
Mm-hmm.
elsewhere? But there was still a limited amount of information that it needed to go with that. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
need to recount what had been happening in my marriage for years. I just needed to say, I'm having a really difficult time with this particular aspect of my life. I'm concerned
Mhm.
that it will impact me negatively in the workplace. Can you please keep an eye on this and point me in the right direction? And I think there's also, we're not asking people to say, check your behavior. We're just asking people sometimes to forgive everything.
Mhm.
And that's another way that it's not working as well as we want it to.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's back to that whole thing of because we are so all or nothing with things in our culture, right? And I think it goes back to this idea of either you are either you know, sharing everything or sharing nothing. And I think that that again is it's hard because there isn't a formula for it. It
Yep.
really is this combination of you know, who you are, where you work, what kind of industry it is, who you're working with, who's in the room, who's right, all of these
Yeah.
little nuances that people want. Again, people want these formulas for how to do certain things. And sometimes it's just like there is no formula. It's just it's like it's that person. Like,
Yeah.
does this
I,
feel right? Does this feel
yeah.
does it feel like too much or not? Right.
I mean, I do think there needs to be a decision made when you decide you need to disclose a bunch of personal stuff in
Mm-hmm.
the office about what is motivating me to do this? Do I
Mm-hmm.
just want these people to know me as a person? If so, is that their role in my life? No, their role in my life is as a colleague.
Mm-hmm.
Um, am I asking so that I can get someone to check my behavior? If so, what is the least amount of information I need to share? If
Mm-hmm.
I need to ask for a little more flexibility in terms of coming and going, what is the right amount of information to share? And I think there's a lot of seeking emotional support in the workplace because people aren't necessarily getting it in other places.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen the increase in mental health issues, and I think we know that social media can make us feel very lonely and like giant failures,
Mm-hmm.
and there's less communing going on, and I think as a result we're looking for assurances and feedback and support from parts of our life that is not really that part of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm optimistic that that may work itself out,
Mm-hmm.
in that it's also a generation who doesn't want to be defined by their work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
More and more people are like, I don't want to be defined by my work. And
Mm-hmm.
so maybe my workplace should just get this part of me, and who I am wholly and completely isn't their business.
Mm-hmm.
And I shouldn't have to lie about who my spouse is because I won't get a promotion, but also is part of me just for me. And I feel like the older I get, the more I want my work to be about work
Mm-hmm.
and parts of my home to be about home. I don't want to come home and talk to my best friends or a partner about all the worst things that happen to me all day. I
Mm-hmm.
I want them to be done to a degree, and if I need specific input, I'm going to ask the right person for it. And that's part of kind of making sure I show up for my kid. If I am constantly whirling in work, I'm not showing up for her.
Mm-hmm.
But that also means, what are the boundaries that make it possible for me to still be known as a human being
Mm-hmm.
and treated with humanity, um, but that leaves some of myself to myself because I am not my work and my work is not me.
Yeah. No, it's really, I mean, I could talk about this for hours. It really, no, it really is fascinating, this idea of, right, like, because when I think about young people entering the workforce, I always think about, early bosses, you can have such a huge impact on this person. Like you really can change the life. And I think that sometimes people take this attitude of, oh, well, they're young, they're going to leave anyway. And it's like, yeah, you may have to have a new assistant every couple years. That just might be, and that's very much the Hollywood industry, right? Like
Yep.
that just might be how it is. That does not mean that you're not doing a good job and that you're not Because I think people forget that. They forget that, like, even if you've got people that are going,
Mm-hmm.
I guarantee you that person who's staying with you for 2.5 years would have been gone in a year.
Yep.
So you are getting more of them than you really are. And that, don't you want people who leave your company, your job, you, to have warm and fuzzy feelings about you?
Yeah.
Doesn't that carry you for the
Yeah.
rest of your, doesn't that help? And that's the other part that I don't get too, is how short-sighted people can be, to see that we get so fixated on, well, they're going to leave and I'm going to have to retrain somebody and that's going to be
Mm-hmm.
difficult. And, they want this and they want that. It's like, well, but yeah, but don't you want them to soar?
Right.
Isn't that the ultimate idea of all of this? Don't we want our young people to do well?
Yep.
And that's the part that I get very mad at people. I'm a Gen X too, of our generation and older, of like, why are you doing what everyone did to us? Like, why are you repeating this? Why are you doing this?
Yep.
Why can't we get this? Why are we still struggling with, young people are going to come in and disrupt things and say things that you don't agree with and make you crazy and all of those things, because they're young and they don't know what they don't know. And your job is to help them figure out, like, how to contain it all and
Yep.
move forward, right?
And I mean, and it's always been true.
Yes.
You know, it's always been true. I think the values shift around centering your entire being around work that Gen X did.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think we are struggling with that piece. Like,
Yes.
do you really care about this job if you push your chair in at 5? And yes, you've delivered your deliverables, but could you maybe
Mm-hmm.
have done more? And I think we struggle from that point, and we don't put enough emphasis. I think one of the places that's interesting is in Hollywood. There are people that you can say, oh, this assistant came off of that desk, they'll be good. And
Yeah.
not because that person was a terrifying shit show, but because they bothered to mold their assistant.
Mm-hmm.
They had a certain expectation of how that person would show up in the role, but they also bothered to get them up to speed fast and make sure they had the information they needed to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, how we have to think about ourselves more in the workplace. Is it's not, what am I doing? It's, my job is no longer just producing. My
Mm-hmm.
job is helping other people become more effective. And we don't do a good job of recognizing that in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to really think about that in ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I don't think that we think enough about how what we say, what we do, our attitude, how that impacts other people. And that's the one thing that I work very hard to try to be very mindful of, like, how am I entering a room? How am I entering a situation? How is this? And I've had to learn that as a parent. It was really my son who could feel my energy, because he's such an empath that he could feel my energy. And I was like, oh, because you're feeling, I'm smiling and going, what do you want for breakfast? But really underneath, I'm stressed out. And but he
Yep.
could feel that. And that part's really true too. That right, just like kids are only as healthy as their parents. And
Yep.
employees are only as healthy as
The
their
workplace.
leader, the
Yep.
workplace, their leaders, the leaders, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
That's really true. I think it's funny because we both aren't taught intentionally a lot about management before we end up in those jobs. And
Yes.
becoming a parent helped me
Mm-hmm.
become a better, more empathetic, more communicative, more specific manager. Because I realized what a teaching process is. And I also was really bad at something for the first time in
Mm-hmm.
my life. And so it
Mm-hmm.
gave me so much more patience with someone who was struggling to figure out a job, because until I had an infant, I had never been so bad at anything in my entire life. And it was like, it's totally graded on a different curve. It's a
Mm-hmm.
freaking nightmare. Um, but those two things. And then at the same time, I feel like I've learned more about how to communicate with partners and friends, and problem solving and conflict resolution through things I've learned at work than anything I learned
Mm-hmm.
in my private life, which
Yes.
just kills me.
Yeah. Well, and that's why these two, right? You can't turn off these parts. We grow and learn as human beings, and that does influence that piece. Like they all interconnect in some way, shape, or form. It's just a matter of, again, everyone feels so pressed for time, but I think that's one of the pieces is I believe we have to make this more of a priority. We have to make this like this needs to be the thing that you do and you push all the other stuff aside
Mhm.
now. And that part's really, really important. But I thank you so much for coming on. Like I said, I could keep talking about this. You started your own firm.
Yes.
And so tell us all about that and where people can find you or hire you.
I started a firm basically helping companies figure out what the heck they needed to do about HR.
Mhm.
So I'm a HR consultant, but I consult about HR. So companies need to decide, are we ready to bring people in-house? Should we outsource this entirely? What kind of professional HR people do we need to hire based on our goals? And I want to leave an educated consumer of what HR is and how it impacts your business because it's this massive underused lever.
Mhm.
And so I did some general HR consulting and really realized this is what I wanted to focus on. Because if we're thinking more about how people feel at work, we're impacting those people's lives, which are impacting the lives of the people around them. So
Mhm.
it is both proving to people who refuse to recognize the power that exists within HR to make a business succeed or fail.
Mhm.
Um, and also, it just has this nice trickle down on how people feel in the world,
Yeah.
and that makes me really happy. So I'm often kind of a first stop when people are thinking about what should we do next? Are we big enough to hire? Have we hired the right people? And then also, a lot of times they've thrown down this HR foundation that does not support this new structure they've built.
Mhm.
And so at that point, it's revisiting what do we need? What should we have in place? What should we have in house? What should we be prioritizing? And a lot of that is just not known to the people who are running things on a day to day basis because it is kind of it's HR is many different things. It's
Yeah.
composed of a number of specialties, but it's also, there are a lot of ways to go about it.
Mhm.
And finding someone who can tell you how to use the function in the way that you want to impact your employees is not easy to do if you don't know who those people are or what they do for a living. So
Yeah.
it's one part matchmaking, um, it's one part diagnostics,
Mhm.
um, and but really I love it because I'm setting people up to have a good workplace and an effective workplace, and we all feel better when things are going better at work.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here. And thank you for listening to the Gen Mess with Tess. Remember, we're not just fixing the mess, we're learning how to live in it.